Yay!
Yay.
Here we are.
Kia ora, everyone. Awesome to see people have already jumped on. I've just been busy sending out that link via message and on the comment section of the post. So we'll just be watching people trickle in, but I see that Georgia and Kirsten have already joined us. So if you guys have any questions to start us off, then we'll be, on our way. Great to be here again for another month. Kirsten, you said you can't hear anything. I had it on mute just as we were working out sending the link and such. But yeah, I've unmuted it now, so you should be able to hear us. But do mention if you still can't. So for those that have just joined us and are still trickling in, you'll see there's a live chat on your right or left of your screen. Just use that to post your questions and say where you're from as well, and we'll be able to base the answers based on where you are. So we're just going to awkwardly stare at the screen at ourselves whilst we wait for some questions.
So I hope none of you guys from New Zealand are disappointed with your subtropicals. We had some heavy frosts throughout the country. Luckily, we didn't here. Even our taro down in the flat, frosty market garden area survived all right. So we were fine. But I heard that a lot of other people around the country had some ugly-looking banana plants. So don't despair. They do recover. But of course, any setback like that will make the bunches smaller. That's the price you pay. And
cool. So we've got first question from Kirsten. Got it. You were from, you haven't said somewhere. We have been looking into the electric bike options. How steep can they manage? Not sure how steep you use them at your place.
Right. So every bike that we have is a bit different. And the bus bike is the strongest one with a 1,000-watt motor, and it can go really steep hill. The limit is actually more where the front wheel starts lifting off, because you're tipping back too far. That is actually far more the limit than how steep can it go up. And then of course it's a question, how much do you carry? If you have it on your bicycle rack, that adds to the lifting of the front wheel, which makes it a bit dangerous because you lose the balance a bit on it and so. And then the traction of your wheel as well. Unless you have knobbly tires, your back wheel will start spinning through, not gripping before your bicycle runs out of power. But if you have a trailer, then this is not a problem, but the added weight of just an empty trailer already can be a bit disappointing. So as soon as you start pulling a trailer with weight up a hill, it gets really hard to do something like that. And we had been recently considering looking into the New Zealand-made Upco bike, but then inquiring about it, we found that despite its two-wheel traction, because it's a hub motor, it doesn't seem to be any better than the bus bike going up a hill. So the Upco bike, despite the double traction, is not going to improve on that by the sounds of it, because the hub motors are just not as good anyway. At the moment, the news here is Josh just bought a second-hand cheap tricycle made in China with a 1,500-watt motor, and that is actually showing really promising results so far. We only had it a couple of days now, but that is, for the price, unbeatable, and what it can do is amazing, and you don't have the problem of getting off the bike and opening a gate and come back to the bike and bike fell over sort of thing, as we have with our e-bikes. Especially now with the wet ground, the bike stand is our weakest point, whereas that's where the three-wheelers come in. There's no trouble with that sort of thing, and you can still pull a nice trail around and so on. So no doubt we're going to update you on that with a video. I think it deserves that. And so maybe hold your purchases and wait for what we have to show you on that, because that is a really, even if you get them new, it's a really it's a really low price compared to the e-bikes that you would otherwise normally buy.
But the fat bike, the Buzz bike, has handled pretty steep slopes, and even your little one can go up.
Yes. I mean, of course, a normal bike, I mean, the Buzz bike with only 2 wheels has other advantages over a 3-wheeler, no doubt about that. You can do totally different terrain with it, of course, and everything, and it's much nicer feeling on it, and all of that sort of thing. You have to take that into consideration too. Yeah.
And just following through, because you've added another question onto that, so I thought we could jump ahead and just finish off on that electric bike category. Kirsten, you also mentioned also how off-road can you handle, concerned that it would dig into the soft grass patches?
Again, that's where the Buzz bike comes in with the fat tires. That's probably the main reason we bought it, so we can skim over our wet paddocks in winter without leaving any grooves in the grass, and that makes the steering easier. If your front wheel doesn't dig into the sod, it makes it much easier to dig to steer, and you don't compact the soil as much, of course. And if you want to go a step further, you can run sits on the ground, and it reduces compaction a lot again, and the sinking in and whatnot. So there's that too you can do. And when the Buzz bike is quite heavy, it's almost like riding a motorbike, in which I'm not used to. So it is not as nimble as our converted bike, but you can do crazy off-road stuff with it as well. And if you train on it, then yeah, you can do really crazy stunts. No doubt about that.
So then we've got a question from Georgia asking, assuming you avoid planting, digging when the ground is pretty wet, have a bunch of temperate root ball plants that would want to plant urgently, but ground is pretty sodden?
Well, I mean, the thing is, if you plant something with like a bare rooted and this and that, you need to open a hole and then fill it up. So I should have filmed it. We just planted a few walnuts and chestnuts, and it was a stream flat, and the soil was not as bad as on our hillside, but nevertheless, it was a bit cloddy in places. So we dug holes at least as big as the longest roots, of course, and then filled into the bottom. We filled some biochar, and then we put some gravel that we had to get rid of from some roadsides, and then we started putting rough compost in, and then some sandy soil that we got, and then you lift the tree up a bit so that the soil can sort of shake between the bare roots, and then you put some sifted compost around it so it actually can make it into the space between the roots, so you don't have air pockets.
Yeah, last thing you want is the air pockets around those roots, because then they will dry out come spring and summer if they haven't fully established. So you really want to nestle that soil around the roots as much as possible.
Yeah. And then what do you do with your soddy ground that you dig up? You could make a bit of a berm around your hole, because what you need to keep in mind whenever you fill anything into a planting hole that is not biochar and it's not gravel and sand, those things stay as they are. But any compost that you put in, it will shrink, and then before you know it, your tree is falling into the ground 10 centimeters, 20 centimeters, and that is not good, because it might collect water and fill up. So what you want to do is you want to have a really nice, proud planting site, and you use the clods that you dug out of the hole, that sod, you put it around like a little wall as it was, and inside that mound, or inside the berm, you fill it up to that, so you are about 20 centimeters above your original level, and before you know it, in a year or two, the tree will be even with the rest. And then don't forget, take advantage of putting some potatoes in with it. By the time you do your first weeding around the tree, your potatoes will be ready to harvest, so you take them back home and get the calories back that you put out for weeding. And if you don't have geese and so on like we do, then by all means put some comfrey around it, some rhubarb,
chicory.
Yeah, any of that. So don't leave it to be just a tree. Yeah, and do that fairly soon. So no bare soil for long, and you want to immediately start making sugar in that place besides what the tree does.
So then we've got another question from Heather from Whangaripo. Do you use many berries, and how do you incorporate them?
I think you can talk about that one.
Berries, so generally more of a temperate climate. We have used the thornless black satin blackberry in our temperate sort of orchard centerpiece squares. There's basically each square, so each sort of 10 square meter guild or food forest block has a primary tree, either a apple or a plum or a pear or hazelnut, and then we've put in a blueberry and one of those thornless blackberries in each square as well, with the intention that the blueberries would bush out, occupying that lower strata underneath our climax tree of the apple, and provide us with berries in the years before our apples are ready. And the blackberries, the thornless blackberries, being climber berries, we actually pruned up the supporting poplar trees that we also had in those squares. The poplars were used to hold the newly planted climax trees, apple trees, in place. And we pruned the lower branches of those poplars to leave about 10 centimeter stems of the lower branches, which offers that cage-like ladder structure that then we can hang the thornless blackberry canes on. So that way we have them lifted off the ground, so they're not sort of draping everywhere and creating a mess, and it's much easier to harvest the berries. What's also nice about the thornless blackberries is that every cane that has produced in a season dies back, so you don't get sort of overrun with this massive blackberry bush, and they're obviously thornless. So yeah, I highly recommend them. Really heavy croppers. We've had them I had berries from them pretty much from the first season, so they're a great way to get a harvest straight away from your guild. And yeah, blueberries, if you're in a more sort of wet but free draining soils and temperate. What other berries are we using?
Elderberries.
Elderberries, another great one for more sort of wet areas. They can handle a little bit more waterlogged, but they also like free draining soils. But yeah, great chop and drop food forest berry for temperate regions. Up in the South Island, they do spread by seed because they actually need a certain temperature for the seeds to germinate. So if you're sort of cautious about spreading them as weeds, down in the South Island, that is a reality. However, up in Northland, the temperatures don't get low enough for them to germinate, so they're actually sterile via seed, so that you can only propagate them by cuttings. And you basically just do big stakes, put them straight into the soil, so they grow super easy. So they're a great way of getting a lot of biomass as well as berries for winter. Also, mulberries is another great berry for more subtropical and temperate regions. Deciduous, fast-growing, grows from stakes. You can shape them as you want so that you can keep them really pruned or let them go high. So another great one to have in temperate food forest settings where you really want to get that strata right with not creating too much humidity around your apple trees. We haven't had much experience with the raspberries, so we can't speak to that, but I imagine, that could be interesting to play around with. Strawberries. We've done a little bit with strawberries, combining them in a syntropic system down there as well, and actually having the other plants like the taro and raisin trees and all the other fruit trees has created a bit of a distraction for the birds. So we've often found that actually we got to get a harvest of strawberries, but nothing that we can say we've had a decent strawberry crop. If you are doing strawberries, an interesting one to look into that's hardier and also the birds don't go for it because they are white is the white alpine strawberry. Had quite a lot of success with that. It goes more like a lawn, and white strawberries, really sweet and quite well producing. So that's sort of
maybe
experience in that.
I'll share what I heard yesterday about the kaikatia.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, just yesterday I talked to my syntropy friend Jackie up in Hokianga, and she pointed out that for growing blueberries, a kaikatia would be a good companion. Because they're fairly fast growing, you can prune them. There's pines and so you can't. And keep in mind that a lot of berries, blueberries especially, and blackberries, they do like sort of coniferous, sort of acidic litter. That's what they come from. And so, as Frida said, blueberries need free draining but moist. So they are actually our high bush blueberries. They come from northern Florida, and so they come from sandy swamps. So it's a bit of a contradiction, like free draining swamps. But imagine there would be sort of sandy islands that are a bit elevated over the swamp, but they get the capillary action coming from below. So if you want to experiment on that, we probably won't be able to do it ourselves. But say you have a swampy river flat, you might want to make some raised beds in there. Maybe a meter or so wide, onto which you put your blueberries, so they are fairly free draining but still in a swampy environment. And in the lower trenches, or the opposite of the raised bed, where it's more moist and from which you took the nice topsoil away, in those places then you could put a row of kaikatia and use them then as a nurse crop and mulch and acidity provider. And you keep pruning them, but keep them above the blueberry. So blueberry, the high bush that we have, they don't like so much shade as the wild blueberries that you might know from Northern Europe or Northern America. They are more sun-loving. However, they can handle some shade from pines. In a natural habitat, they do grow with pines in a sort of light shade environment. So if you do that, keep us updated. It would be really nice to see that. And of course, that might make it tricky for netting. Maybe it would even help having kaikatia and put a net over the whole lot. I don't know. But we had 100 blueberry shrubs, and we thought we wouldn't see many berries coming from that if we wouldn't net it. And then yet we were surprised that the bird damage was actually totally negligible. It was actually not an issue at all. We had other issues with twig dieback because of too much kaikuyu and whatnot, but the birds were not the problem.
Before we knew better about the
before
kaikuyu.
before we knew all of the Teutonia stuff. So kaikatia blueberry could be a nice marriage between those two species.
The other one I wanted to quickly say regarding mulberries, we're now experimenting with Shatut mulberry, which is a dwarf, more bushy mulberry variety. So we're excited about that, and we'll be keeping people updated. on that. It hasn't produced yet, but we've planted out heaps. So yeah, keep you posted on that. So our next question from Georgia is, would you direct propagate Tittonia right now or wait until it's a bit warmer? And do you sometimes propagate newer shoots also? Likewise for banana grass. That's one for you.
Okay. Unfortunately, we never put labels on our Titonias to remember when we planted them. But actually, I'm getting more and more the feeling that unless it's too dry, it doesn't matter when you plant them. So I have a feeling now is okay. We planted some last year in September, and only half of them made it. And so I just recently replanted them. And when I pulled the old ones out, I saw that they actually had made roots, but for some reason they didn't make shoots. So it could be that our geese went for them, or yeah, something else. I don't know. But I think I mentioned it last time. Try to find stakes that are not already all budding, having leaves coming out that you have to rub off then, and then they have to redo them. I think they might not like that. Try to find stakes that are dormant for the whole length that you're going to plant.
So generally lower down in the plant before they bud off into the leaves.
But what you might find is when you take planting material right now, they're actually having buds all the way down if you haven't taken, or even if you have taken the flowers off. So that might be more the problem rather than the temperature or anything like that. I would just insist on doing it again and again. If you have to spend a lot of money on it, then maybe wait until it's a bit warmer. But I have a feeling it works. I put some out a month ago and I can see them budding now. So I have a feeling they're going to do it. Of course, it depends on, is it frosty where you are, because the young shoots might get burnt off in the frost. And yes, you can grow them from the more fresh green tips. We learned that as well not too long ago. We haven't done much of it yet, but the few experiments we did, yes. However, if you put them into thick kikuyu, you want a bit of an energy reserve in your stakes. So I would still go with the gray, older stakes rather than the green ones, just because I think they have more energy. But for the sake of propagating them fast, use whatever you can. You can take, like a pinky size little stick, 5 centimeters, and put it on a hotbed. Whatever. If you have to multiply and you want to do it cheap, do it, but do it in a controlled environment. Don't expect these little things to grow in your kikuyu sod. So there's the difference. They do grow from anything, but it depends on the conditions. In banana grass, I have a feeling that might need more the warmer temperatures. So I would wait with that maybe till October, ideally. Having said that, we are doing it at the moment. We just hope it's going to work. But banana grass, I would have a bit more hesitation to say, yes, you can just go ahead and do it now.
And Kirsten, got another question. Also, no, that's the how off-road. We've covered that one. Oh, yeah. And then you've asked a question, would you use poplar like you do eucalyptus? Yes, in the sense that it's a emergent tree that you can use to offer that shade to your lower layers. However, the difference between the poplar and the eucalyptus is that the poplar is deciduous. So depending if that's something you want or not, if you would like to let that sun into your lower canopy in winter, then poplar is the go. However, if you want that evergreen production of biomass throughout winter and that frost protection in winter, then having that evergreen eucalyptus would be really valuable as well. And also the other big difference is that poplars are cutting grown or by stakes, and eucalyptus is grown by seed. So the root structure is very different. So the development below the soil in terms of what it does, breaking up the soil, will be drastically different as well. So yeah, it really depends what you would use them for. But otherwise, in terms of incorporating them into the system, absolutely, poplars have their role. And yeah, it's all about just whether you want that deciduous or evergreen. Do you want to plant them by stake, or do you want to plant seedlings? They both have their benefits and their pros and cons depending on the situation.
Can I add to that still?
Sure.
The poplar would normally need more humidity than eucalypts, but eucalypts, of course, you can also find a whole spectrum from super drought hardy to waterlog hardy and so on. With poplars, to some degree too, you can go, for instance, to the Lombardini poplar, the one that you see in those Italian paintings, those candle-like sort of poplars. They are the most drought-hardy ones. And they are also a bit harder to propagate from stakes, but you can. I think ideally, if the conditions allow for either or, I think ideally you have them alternating.
Yeah.
I would go for that. The growth rate is about the same. Both need to be on the same strata at the same time. Both will give you timber. Yeah, poplar timber is nothing to sneer at either. And yeah, but eucalyptus will be tougher for drought, for wind, and so on than most poplars still.
And
do
you propagate your own kumara tipu? If so, how do you do it? You've done more of that in the past, haven't you?
Yeah, it's the right months now to do that. So grab a kumara. The more surefire one would be the Beauregard, and you get a nice healthy tuber. Put it in a box of scoria or sand, and ideally have it in your greenhouse. Sit back and wait. Hopefully, no rat is going for it. Put something over it, and then by Labor Weekend, October, you should have 50, 100 tipus that you can then gently break off and plant out in a sort of a J shape, so they make more roots from here still.
So lying the roots down flat and then up. Yep.
Yeah, so they make maximum amount of roots whilst they are establishing.
And here, Giorgio asked, when would you plant sorghum? Now or wait until it's warmer?
Okay, so first of all, sorry if I have not got back to you guys about the sorghum seeds. I have been on the phone to various suppliers. I realized that I gave you the wrong name of the seed supplier. I said it was Specialty Seeds, but actually where we got ours from, the ones that gave us a free sample, sorry, I don't think they do it for everybody, but it was called Smart Forage. And they don't want to break it down into smaller amounts. Then I tried Westco on the South Island. They don't want to do it either. So we still have to buy the big bag. And we still have bags of time. October, I wouldn't do it before October, really. I mean, you could plant some in root trainers or plugs or whatever, maybe end of September. But in the end, I think direct seeding is really the way to go. Yeah, I mean, we sometimes do both. And considering now that it is a perennial, that it lives for 2 years easily, it is worthwhile to grow it in a tray and then transplanting it. It does make sense now. If it was just an annual, then you would say, just for green manure, why would you do that? But knowing that it is at least in the northern part of the country, it's a perennial plant, it could make sense for everyone to do that. But both work great. And September, October.
And I would have just on a note on the sorghum, when you do plant the sorghum, I found that it takes quite a long time for them to establish and really become established in the food in the system as a mulching crop. So planting either chicory or oats at the same time as you do the sorghum, because they will come up and fill that gap whilst the sorghum is establishing. Otherwise, you'll have these sort of big gaps where you'll only have sort of one blade of sorghum that you don't really want to cut down too much. But as soon as they hit the sort of 3.5 months lifespan time, then they really start filling out, and then you can chop and drop them quite frequently. But it takes a good 3 to 4 months for them to really establish. So having your succession of other things that you plant at the same time as your sorghum, oats, chicory, plantain, buckwheat, all those sort of grasses is really quite crucial.
Can I add to that for you guys who are in the colder climates and got excited about our sorghum experiment? My friend Jackie again, she did beds with rows of cocksfoot and potatoes, and had really good success with that, doing the same thing as we did with sorghum, but with the cocksfoot. And we did it as well, but it wasn't.
Well, we had the end of the seed in that bed, so
so the seed were a bit not very nice, but give that a go. You can get this in a year. You can get easily 12 cuts out of your cocksfoot to mulch your potatoes. Well, not for the potato season, but you would get, say, 6-7 cuts of cocksfoot to mulch the very potatoes that you have in between them. That's massive.
So, Kirsten, you've just added that with the kumara, getting the tipu from them, that they always rot for you. Is there anything that you would highlight in the methods you do to avoid rotting?
It could be that if you buy them from a supermarket, that they might be sprayed with something to prevent them from germinating, from sprouting. So maybe get them from an organic shop, unless you have done that already and that didn't work. Otherwise, I wouldn't know it. It happens that occasionally a tuber goes bad, but normally it works well for us. So just make sure they're not from a supermarket where they might have been sprayed with something to prevent the sprouting.
And Jake, kia ora, Jake, welcome on board. I see you've got the questions from the comments that I was just reading out, so it's cool to see you've put them on here. So your question is, in other organic farm/garden methods, an abundance of flowers is encouraged to attract pollinators. Could you explain why in Syntropy this is unnecessary? And then carrying on, or do pollinators just come when you do let a food chop go to flower? Also, what about saving seeds?
Me? You?
You start and I'll add on.
Okay.
Great question. Really good question.
So it is a tough one, I know. And for instance, just over the last few weeks, I would have liked to cut down some albicias or the tops of some of them because they're flowering right now. I want to reduce them and so on. And then I see the tuis in there every evening, just having a big party in there, and I go, no, I can't do that. So the same as with titonias, they get to their prime flowering, and that's when you should cut them, and you go like, can't do that. So, but the thing is, once they flower and you notice that the flowers start wilting away, then you definitely go for them. So you don't let them actually go into the real senescence. So when they're flowering, they're still at their prime, and you could say, okay, do that, take them out right afterwards, but don't let it go on after that. So you have to be ready to go jump in and take them out when they're just past the prime flower. And the other thing is maybe the important thing where you really can't show any mercy is when grasses flower. that is really important, that you don't get your grasses into flower, because they don't feed any pollinators. They're wind pollinators. So with grasses, you don't have to worry about pollinators. You make sure that they are cut off way before they even flower. As soon as they make a stalk ready to flower, you cut them back. Otherwise, you lose a lot of drive in your grasses. And then there are the weeds that are flowering. And they're usually the ones that flower, especially in your vegetable garden or in a transition from the annual vegetable garden to your perennial syntropy garden. When that is happening, that your weeds are starting to flower, like the land cresses and all these little things that start to flower really fast. It's their selective advantage. They have evolved to flower before your crops in order to survive. And that's what's going to slow down and depress your vegetable growth. It's not that there is weeds, it's that those weeds are early flowering before anything else is ready to flower. So you have to be onto them. And that way, you also prevent them from setting seeds and multiplying again. Yeah, the classic example of that would be Thalia, the land cress, which has the fastest cycle of the lot. Yeah, it flowers within weeks of coming up. It has these little white flowers, and then short after, you have little seed pods. You touch them and they explode and the seeds fly around. So that goes really fast. And so you might want to do a pruning for that, just for those early weeds, before you do anything else in your vegetable garden.
Yeah. But just take a step back before we get details into different kinds of flowers, just to give people a broad idea of why we are talking about chopping flowers off and the concept of senescence. So it stems from senescence being a state of growth that a plant goes from. So from a vegetative growth, where the plants are in full go to produce biomass, to accumulate nutrients, to then go into a generative phase where they start going from leaf and sort of biomass production to propagation production. So they start slowing down in growth, putting the energy into seeds and flowers, which takes away from the growth of that plant. So if we are up for heightening and enhancing the growth of that plant, we want to keep it at the vegetative state, and that's why you chop and drop before it gets into the generative phase, the senescence phase. And there is a hormone that is released in both phases. So there's a hormone that's released in the vegetative state that actually gets released through either airborne hormones or root hormones that signal to surrounding plants to also be in that state. So when you have a really thriving, vibrant plant, you're gonna that's going to be emitting hormones to plants to do the same thing. So you're going to notice that if you've got really nicely pruned grasses, the trees and such that you have in your syntropy system is also going to increase or have a vital growth to it rather than sort of slow down. The same effect that when you reach the senescence side, the generative phase, it's also releasing a hormone for other plants to slow down and start to go into seed production. And a way to explain this is, most people are familiar, if you've got like broccoli that's going to bolt, you also find that you've got lettuces nearby that are also bolting. So once something's bolting, other things start bolting, and that's the same effect that happens in trees and grasses and plants and across all those as well. So that's what we're trying to minimize. It's not to say that we're against pollinators, because they play a really crucial role in food forest, in pollinating the variety of different fruits that we have going on. For example, our cherimoya trees, we don't, when they plant monocrops of them, because they don't have pollinators. And so yeah, it is crucial to have pollinators. It's crucial to support them. So it also depends what kind of environment you have around you, what other kind of diversity. If you're in the middle of farming land and you're the only oasis of permaculture or food forest, then yeah, it might be important for you to actually allow for things to go into flower so that you are actually increasing and supporting the pollinators around you, and maybe your focus then isn't on the amount of growth and vitality they're having in the food forest, but just harboring and encouraging those pollinators. But still keep it in mind and at least chop it back when it's, so you notice sort of 3 phases: the vegetative growth, generative phase where it's sort of in sort of full flower and seed formation, and then you start seeing the sort of really senescence decline where it looks really scraggly and dead and stagnant. And that's really what you want to avoid at all costs. So even if you do want to support pollinators, do try and get it after it starts really declining in its growth. And as for seed saving, yeah, that's always really great, because having your own seed in your own bioregion year after year just increases the resilience and the information of your climate and your area in that seed. So that genetic pool is just so much stronger, more resilient. So we totally encourage seed saving and propagating your own seeds. In terms of vegetable and market garden, that's a whole practice in itself in terms of which pollinators you allow in and crossbreeding and whatnot. However, yeah, if it's something that you're up to in terms of trees and all that, then by all means do save the seed, and you just have to allow for the fact that that hormone effect will happen, so that your surrounding plants will slow down. It's just something you have to take into account then, see how you prioritize it. But like Klaus mentioned, don't let everything go to seed then. Be conscious about what you go into seed and when and for how long. Don't just let it go on and on and on into seed and then die back. And so really have that timing down packed as much as you can. Like I said, the grasses, keep those down. But things that you do want to save seed, want to go into flower, then by all means do that for the pollinators and for seed saving. But just be conscious of that effect and try and minimize it where possible. That's our recommendation.
Should I say something on seed saving?
Sure. Yeah.
With the seed saving, in your vegetable beds, if you don't even talk about syntropy, but syntropy, of course, the same and even more so, having a few plants stuffing around to save vegetable seeds can really have a bad effect on all the surrounding, as Frida said. And if you do want to save your own seed, really actually look into it. A lot of mistakes to be made. For instance, often people would pick the seeds off the first plant that makes seeds, and so you're selecting for early bolting. That's what you do. And so you want, say for instance, you have carrots. You want the biggest carrots that are hanging on the longest before they flower, and then you would dig them out and you put the fridge for a while and collect quite a few of them. You need a few of them. And then you plant them in a seed bed that is only there for the purpose of letting them grow out their seeds, and put them together so they can pollinate each other. Put a cloche over it so no carrot weed will cross-pollinate with them. That's how you would do that. You're not just going to let some carrots go to seed in your bed and have everything around getting sort of stagnant because of you waiting for some seeds. It doesn't quite work like that. It is seed saving with plants like carrots and broccoli and so on is actually quite a skill, and we don't do it because it's if you want to do it well, it's really hard. You have to really dedicate yourself to it. There was another question up here from Georgina with the pioneer emerging. How do you tend to take them out? Right. So take an example for, say, flame trees. Yeah, the most extreme for us, flame trees. So we keep them in the system long enough until they're not necessary anymore. When are they not necessary anymore? Say, we try to keep them always pruned right up in the canopy of bananas. So on the high strata, we prune them. So we have our fantastic Score Pro climbing frame, which makes it really easy to get up to 6 meters standing for us and 7 meters working on it. And we can cut them, say, at 6.5 meters easily, no sweat. And that means where we cut them, they're right above the banana. So they're constantly regrowing already above the banana. Every year or twice a year, they keep on regrowing above the banana. Now, when do we not need them anymore? Once our Inga beans are strong enough to give us enough shade up there and enough of a frame that we can climb into the Inga bean and keep pruning them, then we say, all right, let's keep the Inga beans and get rid of the flame trees, because people always give us a hard time about the flame trees. And the Inga beans, of course, they give us a crop on top of it, but they are not as hardy as flame trees. But by that time, our system has moved more towards an abundant system. I wouldn't say we are in a full abundant system yet, but it moved more towards an abundant system where the Inga bean comes in more fittingly than the flame tree. So the flame tree was almost like a companion for the Inga bean. They come up together, and at some point we have to decide between the two, and we want to take out the flame tree. So up to that point, we have pruned it up at 6 meters every year. And now we say, okay, let's get rid of it. So now we cut it at knee height or whatever, way down there. And now the flame tree would have to make new whips coming from down there, from the lower strata where it doesn't belong to, and would have to make it all the way up to emergent to be healthy. But we won't let it, because we come back in half a year, whenever we do another intervention. And by that time, it might be 1 meter, 2 meters tall, because it has a lot of energy from the rootstock. But then we cut it before it can even fully photosynthesize. Yeah, so up to that point, it has been drawing energy from the rootstock. We cut it back and we do it again. And probably the third time, it will get overrun by some fungi, hopefully not armillaria, which can happen. So in order to avoid armillaria, we probably then drill into that rootstock and put some spawn of wood ear in, because that works on flame tree. And that way we prevent armillaria from doing that job instead, right? And then we get something that we can eat, we can sell, works just as well as armillaria without being a hazard for the rest of the planting, right? So that's what we would do. And that's in the case of flame tree. If it's a poplar, we might do the same. Poplar would probably also respond well to wood ear. Or we would use the tawaka, the poplar mushroom instead. But same system, we would do the same. If we would do the same thing with eucalyptus, the fungus that attacks eucalyptus is Schizium something or another. It's usually already there. So every pioneer will have its own fungus that will take it out of the system eventually. You just try it not to be armillaria, which can go for almost anything. So if you have armillaria on your side, then you really have to be careful and get some other fungi in that are not as devastating. But that's how you do it. That's how the forest does it. And we can accelerate that and guide it along. And we just do it similar, but more organized.
And like Klaus said, we've had a few trees, like flame trees, that we've lost by accident prematurely. So it's definitely a doable thing to get out of. It's just about orchestrating that shade, basically identifying what they need and depriving them of that, which is sunlight.
And then, like you took some albicias down the other day.
Yes. Yeah, so albicias, again, the brush wattles, they're great for the first sort of 2 to 3 years of a food forest. Really, really fast growing, nitrogen fixing will start the system. And like a lot of wattles, they don't actually like that much pruning. So the good thing about the brush wattles is that once you don't want them in the system anymore, you start seeing that they're declining. The trunks tend to be quite twisted. You can just chop them right down at the base and they won't regrow at all. So if you cut more than 30% of the biomass, then they'll struggle and decline and die. So they're really easy to get rid of when you want to. They're really fast growing, great pioneer tree to have in that first 2 to 3 years of your system. But yeah, so trees that have about 3 years I chopped back in a food forest block, and yeah, easy as pie, quite soft wood, and yeah, down in seconds.
But what you did, you actually climbed the tree and dropped the branches off rather than dropping the whole tree. I mean, sometimes it works dropping the whole tree, but ideally you take all the limbs off first, so when they smash down, they don't destroy too much.
So that's, a crucial thing to remember when you have these pioneer emergent trees or any emergent tree in your system. You're not thinking you're planting a eucalypt seedling and tree to have as a big eucalyptus tree. You're constantly keeping that pruned and maintained throughout its whole growth, so it doesn't become the sort of unruly big tree that then you have to get an arborist in and squashes half your food forest. So that's
definitely
obviously a negative side effect. So you really want to keep on top of them. The more on top of them you are, the easier it is. And when it comes to it, just keep limbing them up at the base, lifting the crown, and so you have less of a density, and then you basically get a high enough ladder when you want them gone, chop off the top, and then start cutting downwards, and then you don't have a tree falling over in your system.
Yeah, and the same as with the flame, just because we cut the whips off every year, none of those whips is more than 2 meters long, and none of those is going to destroy anything. Anything will recover from something like that quickly. Definitely. There's Jake with the pollinators, I think, and the part of the question was, do pollinators just come because your crops go to flower? Yes. I mean, see, when you compare it to, say, a normal organic crop, where you often still talk about monoculture and so on, and maybe you have some pollinator strips around it and so on. Think about your own farm. There can be pollinator strips where you don't do any management, but if you do want to encourage your crops to produce heavily, you make sure that your helper trees, shrubs, whatever, are kept before they go into senescence. But then, yes, we have, I mean, if you take all our helper trees away, even some of the native plants, for instance, that we have in the FAO usually escapes us and it starts flowering and we get pollinators on it. Mahoy, we never let flower. Somehow it's taking longer. But we have just our crops. We leave the banana flowers on, so bees go for them and a lot of other insects go for them, of course. Macadamia and sapoti, big time. Tamarind. I mean, there's so much diversity just in crops alone that there's never any time where pollinators wouldn't find flowers, even so the helper trees and shrubs we would be more on top of. There's so many crop diversity that there's always some flower to be found. Definitely.
And then Jake, actually just carrying on from that, thanks so much. Just wondering how far the senescence hormone would travel. Maybe you could designate a corner away from the center of food forest to accommodate the pollinators, which is sort of what you went into before. There is a rough rule of thumb, I'm not sure how right it is, depending on not so much with wind-borne hormones, but the height of the plant tree fallen over is the extent at which the hormone or that senescence effect has.
Yeah,
that's sort of a rough analysis.
Of course, it's a gradient. So
having a designated area for pollinators external to your main food production area could be a really good way to handle that. And then Georgia, you asked, could you please explain again planting the... Oh, no, sorry, you've got a question before that. Do you direct sow cocksfoot or grow in trays first? Seem to remember you saying you grew in trays first. Could you plant them now?
So far, we have done everything in trays. If you have them in the smaller root trainers, it's amazing how they take off from that. But being a grass, you don't have to have them in root trainers. Little plugs are fine because they don't make tap roots, of course. And we noticed during summer they don't like to grow much in root trainers. It gets too hot for them often, and so, or in plugs. But what you can also do if you missed it or you don't want to go there, just go to some riparian areas. Of course, you don't want to disturb it too much, but you can rejuvenate clumps by taking something off them. You see, just like with bananas get rejuvenated by taking a few suckers out. So do grasses. So you go in there with a spade, take half a clump out, break that half clump up in plugs. They can be double, triple, quadruple, suckers within each thingy that you then plant. Cut the leaves back, cut the roots back, put it in. By tomorrow, they start growing again. So, and sometimes the ones that you have naturally in your area is, of course, also the ones most adapted. They have figured that out already. However, if you plant into your vegetable garden, you might want one of the higher yielding varieties because it just produces more biomass. It's what they're bred for under better conditions. If you plant it into food forest and it's not so pampered, then maybe the ones that you find growing wild are the ticket for you.
And then you ask, Kirsten, do you use honey locust at all? You've used some in the past. You've got one down in the temperate and one up here, right?
Yeah.
No difference in growth?
Yes, they do like... I mean, they are meant to grow on clay as well, but they seem to do better on more light draining soils as everything. Contrary to what books tell you, they are most likely not nitrogen fixing. They are one of those in the subfamily that is not such a great one, or not at all. However, they are nice to have in the system because they create so little shade and produce so much. Once they get into bean production, in the pod production, they produce so much sugar for animals with very little shade produced. So they would be most suitable for silvopasture. So you have this light canopy and you have your cocksfoot and so on underneath, and you have your animals in there on a short, fast rotation. And they would shower your animals with sugary pods all winter long. So it's a really nice thing to have. Within your food forest, maybe it makes less sense because you might not feel like going around and pick up those pods everywhere. And if you don't pick them up quick, once they hit the ground, they go moldy very fast, and your animals don't like to eat them anymore. Humans can't eat them; they're really high in tannins. So I think they're useless for us, but for goats, fantastic.
Could they be useful because of the light canopy that they have in a food forest in terms of like sun shelter, light sun shelter in food forests and stuff?
Yes, they definitely are good for that. But then there are other plants that might be faster growing to do the same. But the pods for animals it's fantastic.
Cool. And then Georgia, you've got another question. Could you please explain again planting the poplar stakes by your apple trees that you mentioned when talking about berries? How close, etc. So when I mentioned that, we basically planted the apple tree and then actually had 4 poplar stakes surrounding that, about half a meter away from the apple tree. So 4 of them in each corner.
Maybe more.
Meter?
Yeah, probably meter. Somewhere.
Half a meter to a meter. And then we actually tied a string from the poplar stakes to the apple tree. So basically, like you would have, stake a tree normally, but instead of having just wood, we decided to have living stakes as a poplar tree, which would then leaf out and create further that wind protection for the apple tree, as well as initial sun shelter for the young tree, and then eventually keep pruning them up so that they create that emergent top canopy for that, again, that sun shelter and wind shelter. So yeah, about 0.5 meter to 1 meter away from the tree, and ideally 4 of them staked. Yeah, and really more for young, freshly planted trees.
And which reminds me, your question reminds me that I should put some poplar stakes with those walnuts I just planted. When you plant a tree and you do that, again, it helps. So what we're going to do with the walnuts, we're going to put these oyster nets over it to protect them against our geese, because geese can brutally ring bug your fruit trees. You wouldn't believe it, even walnuts. And so we try to find some stake that can do that, or the tying on whatever that actually takes root. Why not? Since we can, why not? Kava is a good variety for that. That's what we used. It's a straighter growing poplar. And when you do that, and when we did that, you wonder if you're nuts when you do that, especially when they start growing and your apple tree or whatever, and there's these 4 poplars. And you see in some cases, out of those 4 poplars, only 2 had taken. And then we go like, dang, only 2. Would it be so nice, so much nicer with 4 of them? You often think the conventional way, oh my God, that's a competition, it's too dense, that's too shady, that's this, that's that. You can easily remedy that. If it's too shady, go snip, 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 and it's open. But what you cannot do in a hurry is, oh, we should have more. Let's get another. No, too late.
So overplant.
Overplant. There's a remedy for that. Underplanting, it's much harder. And don't worry about your friends telling you you're nuts or so. Yeah, don't get anxious about that. For the first 2 years, those poplars will be the best friend of your fruit tree. And after that, you see what you want to do. Yeah. And who knows, maybe even your fruit tree dies, and then you at least have some poplars. But I mean, poplars come easy. They cost nothing. You have them around the corner somewhere. So go for it. That's how it happens in nature.
So our last question here then is, thanks, Kirsten, for your compliment. Kirsten, do you have any issue with the brush wattles causing hay fever, or is that a different wattle? Also, where do you get seeds from and when? Personally, I don't have much experience with wattles and hay fever. They are a bit pollinous, not so much as the Floribunda, that acacia, that's got quite a strong pollen and scent. Maybe that's what you could be mistaking it for. The brush wattle, I haven't really noticed much of a pollination. No, it doesn't flower too abundantly. As for seeds, you can honestly find them along most roadsides, any sort of degraded wasteland areas.
Not now, it's too late. So.
Not now, but like in general.
It's too late or too early.
Yeah, they do have quite a long seed production time though. So yeah, just keep an eye out on the roadside sites. They'll often be around that.
Oh, talking about seed collection. So what you need to get right now, if you're in the north, is that Brazilian buttercup shrub. That's right now seed collecting time. Those little rattle pots. It's a legume shrub that does not fix nitrogen, but as a plus, it handles more shade. Therefore, it's a must-have one. It works so well in our system. It's a great pioneer that can stay in the system for quite a while, and it's so good for pruning.
Awesome. So that's our up for this. Thanks for all your live questions submitted. We do have a question that was submitted from someone that couldn't make it. So if you want to stay on for that, we'll be answering that for him, as this will be recorded. But otherwise, yeah, thanks for turning up and your questions and encouragement and enthusiasm. I really loved having your guys' questions come through, and I'm always learning. So yeah, thank you for that. And look forward to seeing you next month. But yeah, stay tuned if you want to hear the answer to this question. And also be aware that this is all recorded. So if you want to go over anything that we've covered, yeah, it'll be on the Patreon page for you. So we've got a question here.
From Gonzalo in Northwest Portugal.
Okay. The land here is comprised of 2 parcels. Parcel A was a blackwood, Acacia melanoxen,
Yeah, the
forest,
Tasmanian Blackwood
forest just 18 months ago, which was cleared. Parcel B was repeatedly cleared for the past 20 years with a brush cutter and all material burnt to ashes. If I sit back and relax, the place will go rampant on flatweed, aka false dandelion, brambles, ferns, blackwood saplings, lots of it, some eucalyptus, pines, oaks, wild chestnuts, thistles as well. Wow. Any suggestion on how to use this abundance to start steering the system towards a syntropic landscape? Chop and drop everything? This is the question.
Cool. Thanks, Gonzalo. Yeah, I can just see it in front of me. Now, the difference between the 2 places. So one is a rotation of Tasmanian blackwood as a monoculture. So that is an accumulation system for difficult sites. And now that's taken down, of course, billions of suckers coming up. But at the same time, your soil probably would have built up quite a bit of litter horizon from the high tannin leaves. And you would have a root system now in the ground with a lot of nitrogen fixation that has been going on. However, that nitrogen is bound up by the tannin from blackwoods, right? So it will be fairly acidic. It will be, even so it has nitrogen, and nitrogen is bound up with the tannins. And then the other side that has been cleared, burned, will have slipped down in the succession further. So if you're familiar with the triangle in syntropy, the one with the Tasmanian blackwood is a bit more towards abundance, and the one that has been repeatedly burned would have slipped further down. So you will find probably different weeds on both plots that will be interesting for you to study, because they will show you a different degree of degeneration of the soil. So you can learn from that, look at that, take notice of it, which plants want to show up there now, because these are the plants that want to bring that piece of land out of the situation towards abundance if we don't interfere. And unless, of course, those 2 plots have different soils and slopes and orientation and so on, that is, right? Now, so that might mean that each plot needs a different management or different species to be integrated there to achieve similar results. So the one with the Tasmanian blackwood has been cleared. That is a disturbance, whereas the other one with the repeated clearing and burning, that's not a disturbance, it's a devastation. And however, you might have less tannins on the place that gets burned frequently, so you don't have that issue. All right, so study the weeds that want to come up by themselves. Then, I don't know how big those plots are. You might feel overwhelmed if they are bigger, and you have all these weeds showing up now, which some of them are probably quite noxious because their job is to keep humans and animals out, probably. So you have thistles and probably gores and whatever showing up there to keep anything out of the system that's bigger than a rat. And you also will have the problem that you might be facing a fire-prone vegetation, which often comes hand in hand with entering these accumulation cycles, unfortunately. And I don't know how your corner of Portugal is, if you're in the wildfire area or not, or maybe now you are, who knows. So there's that issue to consider as well. Now, how would I start? I probably would determine what distance I want to have pathways going through that place, and do those pathways on contour, maybe 3, 5, or 10 meters apart, depending on the size of your place. Make pathways so you actually know what you're dealing with, and have better access and all of those sort of things. And then study your weeds coming up and make sure that they don't go into senescence. That's important no matter what. So you have to do some management, some selective weeding, but rather than going in with a brush cutter, which is indiscriminate, maybe you want to go through, if it's not too big, you might want to go through with a sickle or machete and actually deal with plants on an individual basis, because there might be some plants that you might not want to cut in that moment and cut others that are going to flower. There might even be some plants you want to get rid of. Plants like that, yes. And others that you want to lift up rather than cutting back, so they can take their strata that they need. So when you go in with a scrub cutter, it's almost like lawn mowing. You bring them all back to the same level, which is a mistake for a lot of species. And then you might want to introduce some species that are not there yet, but could be very helpful there. And you might find that the area with the Tasmanian blackwood is more ready to take chestnuts, for instance, as the new step up. Yeah. And you might find that the burnt part is not ready for it yet, right? Or you might find that the blackwood place would be ready for your chestnuts, but it's too high in tannins and acids. So where you do sow, direct seed your chestnuts or plant them, however you do that, you might want to put some lime there to get them going. Yeah. And so you might want to establish lines for planting things that are a bit more demanding into these areas, and focus your amendments onto those lines. These lines might be only 0.5 meter wide, where you put some lime down, or some compost if you have it, or some rock dust or whatever, and might even do a bit of digging in those rows by hand. Probably you couldn't get a rotary hoe into that, in order to break up some of those roots, to create enough disturbance to get other things established there against the dominance of those root suckers of your Tasmanian blackwood. And focus on those lines. And in between those lines, whatever comes up, you manage selectively. Get an understanding of what are your best friends there and what plants might not be so great. Yeah. I don't know if you would have pampa grass there, for instance. A lot of people are afraid of pampa grass. It could be a great help for you, but you don't want to let it go into senescence, because then it becomes a fire hazard. It becomes slow and stagnant. So you want, if you do have pampa grass, make it your friend. Treat it with respect, cut it back with a sickle or with a hedge trimmer and so on, use it as mulch, and keep it always in a green, thriving state. Yeah. So I could imagine pampa grass, if it's there already, would work really well for you. I don't want to say go out and plant it in rows and this and that. I don't know, I might get arrested for saying that. But it would probably not be a silly idea. Coxfoot could be another helper, at least along your pathways into your tree rows. So if you make a tree row, say 0.5 meter wide, and have your trees in the center, and above and below a row of cocksfoot would probably do miracles. It can adapt to a wide range of conditions. You are now in autumn. You probably can't plant anything yet, but maybe in another month or two, consider putting some black oats in rows as well, just to make management easier. And in those rows, you might have to put something to change the conditions in its favor, like some wood ash, some lime, some rock phosphate, whatever might be lacking there. Think of it in the first year you want to put those inputs in. After that, no more. But the first year, maybe even the second year, but certainly the first year, wherever you plant something that gets you out of that horrible situation you find yourself in, out of that long-term abuse or stagnancy, whatever, put some amendments in there if you have the money, whatever you can find, wood ash if you can get it, and so on. But after that, it should be running on its own. So we call that the first year, it's the placenta, can be 2-year placentas. And those you plant in the density as you would plant them in if you would plant them in a monoculture. But into those tree rows, you plant your trees in a much higher density than you would imagine normally. But your annual plants, you put in the spacing that you would give them in a garden. If you overplant them, then they don't do anything for you. They just grow, they're going to bolt because they're going to be stressed. So they behave different to the long-living ones. Yeah, so if you put some radishes in there, or you put grasses in there and so on, you plant them in the distance that they can actually cope in their density. Okay, so and into those rows you put in some amendments if you can afford it, and the space in between, if you can't afford any amendments, don't worry about it, let the weeds do it for you. But you still need to go in there and manage those weeds. And if you have thistles, don't worry about it, but don't let them flower. A, because you don't want to send seeds to your neighbors, they're gonna hate you for it, and B, you want to get the most out of your thistles by constantly cutting them back so they produce biomass, but don't go into flower. Yeah, and you do the same thing with your gorse, you do the same thing with whatever shows up there. And then, I don't know if you have prickly pear in your area, think about the future. It might still get drier there, it might get more fire, try to get some succulents in. Perhaps, I didn't look up your climate, but perhaps prickly pear would be in order there into your tree rows, or in between tree rows, make a prickly pear row. It gives you a fire retardant, it gives you a crop, and it gives you a drought resilience, and it gives you a succulent mulch when you put them down. So these are options that I could imagine would work for you. Don't take it as a recipe. I'm not familiar with your climate and soil, but something to think outside the square. And then, of course, eucalyptus. Yeah, I know you might not be allowed to grow eucalyptus anymore in Portugal. I heard something like that. If you can, still do it, but give it the management that we keep talking about. Don't think of eucalyptus as your neighbors or whoever might do it as a monoculture where they all fight for the same strata. You put your eucalyptus together with other things, so you have different strata, and suddenly eucalyptus turns into a whole different being, and you keep managing it. You still get timber from it, but you're not getting these massive trees, and neither are they going to evaporate all this water, because a multi-layered food forest is actually attracting humidity rather than pumping it out of your system. So I hope that gave you some ideas. Keep asking if you want more details on it, and we will address that in the next Q&As.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks again, everyone, for showing up. And yeah, I'll be putting this as a recorded post on the Patreon platform. So give it a listen and let us know what you think. See you next month.
Hey, thanks for joining us, and a pleasure as always.
See
you next month.